seat for me. This one here? Okay. Rachel, you going to sit on my right or my left? Well, no panels at all. Whichever you like. Which do you prefer? Two? It's up to you. You want to draw it out? No, two makes sense. Two makes sense. All right.
Okay.
Now, does somebody have cards? They're going to hand me
Everybody's
cards.
seated on this side.
They would make Rachel do that?
Yeah.
Her job? I get handed cards. Well, somebody's got to come. You're not sitting next to me. Somebody puts me in front of me and I read it.
Oh, yeah?
Hello, ma'am. How are you doing?
How was the first Bronx hearing? Was there a big turnout? Were you here? It's your borough.
Don't be offended.
Not huge. It's a smaller space.
I was sitting on the subway.
Not that big at all.
I have this angle. I want to say.
You know, a little morning style island, nowhere near like Manhattan.
Well, I'll have if somebody.
No, I think, and especially at that stage,
Yeah, it was really early on.
people were just talking about whatever.
It was very
right?
quirky.
Unfocused. It was
It
like
was totally
a lot of things
quirky.
about taxi drivers. Or it was like all over the place.
Do we have? Is anyone else coming?
They should come in this way. Don't you guys come?
What do we have?
Do you want me to move down? Yeah, why don't we?
Who will move down?
Is your family still in the Bronx?
Yeah, all of my brother, sister.
Where?
My brother.
Oh,
Sister, what? Okay.
7?
1, 2, 3,
Me?
4,
It doesn't look weird. Okay.
5, 6 over 6.
Sorry.
Which means we can.
No, I just do
We're good. Okay.
if we had it for him.
Is this on?
Because most of the people are here.
I think we're ready to begin. Good evening. I'm calling this meeting to order. This meeting of the 2018 New York City Charter Revision Commission. This is our second round of borough hearings. We are obviously in the Bronx. And I traditionally begin. Is this better? Yes? I like to begin these meetings by telling you that my name is Cesar Perales and I am the chair of this commission. And I would like the members of my commission to introduce themselves. And I will begin on the right, all the way down here with Marco.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Marco Carrion. I currently serve as Commissioner of the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit.
Good evening. My name is Aneta Sicharan, and I'm the Executive Director of Chaya Community Development Corporation. And it's nice to be home in the borough where I grew up.
Good evening, John Siegel. I'm a practicing lawyer and a mayoral designee to the Civilian Complaint Review Board.
Hi there, I'm Sharon Greenberger. I'm the President and CEO of the YMCA of Greater New York.
As I indicated, my name is Cesar Perales. I was formerly the Secretary of State of New York. I previously served in positions, I was Deputy Mayor of the City of New York. I am a former civil rights lawyer and have litigated a number of cases against the city of New York about its voting procedures.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Gotzel. I'm currently a professor at Rutgers Law School and the co-founder and director of research for the Perception Institute, a consortium of social psychologists, law professors, and others focused on the role that bias and other phenomena have to play in creating inequalities that we're, as a country, obviously striving to address. I'm formerly chair of the Rent Guidelines Board and was an associate counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in a previous life. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Just some brief opening remarks. Regularly, mayors of the city of New York appoint commissions to review the city charter, which is the city's constitution. That happens every several years. And Mayor de Blasio decided this year that he would appoint a charter commission with a particular interest in mind. He wanted this commission to look at the city charter and to look at ways in which it could be changed to make our city more democratic. He spoke specifically about his concerns about getting big money out of politics, making elections fairer, certainly eliminating the idea that there exists corruption as a result of our current campaign finance rules, or certainly the appearance of corruption. And but at the same time, a charter revision commission looks at the entire charter, and that's what we have done during our many hearings, having received many, many comments, and had meetings amongst ourselves in which we did not take testimony, but in which we discussed what we had heard. All of this has been done publicly. Everything we do is, well, this is being transmitted live. There's also a videotape that is then put online, so that we have been very transparent in our process, hope to continue to be transparent. Just last week, our staff issued a preliminary report. That report directed us or urged us to focus on some issues, that we should begin the second time around of hearing public discussion. We should begin to narrow our focus and to narrow on certain issues that have come up during the first half of our work. They are campaign finance reform, the method of elections in New York City, a concept of civic engagement in our city, community boards, community board reform, and finally, redistricting of the city council and how that takes place. With that in mind, we will invite anyone in the audience who wishes to speak. We will limit speakers to 3 minutes each. I will be the timekeeper, I think, as usually I'm the bad guy and tells you that you've gone over your time. With that, let us begin. We're going to have, I think, panels of 2 people at a time, but given that the borough president of Manhattan has made the trek to the Bronx, I think we'll let her start, and then after that we will ask the testifiers to come up 2 at a time.
Thank you very much. I never leave Manhattan, but it's an honor to be in the Bronx. I wasn't able to go last night, so I'm here, and I made it, and I appreciate the opportunity to thank you, Mr. Chair, and the members. I know you have many interesting topics that you're considering, but I'm going to focus on community boards, which is one of the ones that you just mentioned. I do have broad expertise. I served on my community board, and as a council member for 12 years, and now as borough president, I interact with the community boards a great deal. So I am in favor of increasing community board diversity and ensuring that boards represent the populations and interests in each district. As Borough President, I think we've done a great deal to address these issues, and I'll talk more about such in my testimony, but I want to make it very, very clear up front that I oppose term limits for community board members. Community board members have a really important role in the land use process in this city, from understanding what can and cannot be built in their districts, to meeting with nonprofit and for-profit developers, to negotiating with developers, and ultimately crafting advisory opinions on each and every project that comes before the city. Community board members must understand land use and all it entails in New York City, and this is not an easy task. Members must know about zoning, tax incentives, housing finance, landmarking, and much more. It's knowledge that takes full-time students and planners years to develop, and community board members must learn it all as part-time volunteers. And learning the zoning text and H3D program is only half the battle. Figuring out how these technical rules and programs apply to particular developments is complicated and time-consuming. I believe strongly that it's only when community board members have mastered all of the above can they meet developers on somewhat of an equal footing. Developers are not term limited. Lobbyists are not term limited. And neither are the expensive lobbyists, as I indicated. Land use lawyers are not term limited. In fact, their prices increase as their experience does. Only when community board members have mastered the complexity of land use can they sufficiently analyze applications, negotiate effectively, and positively plan for their communities. The level of expertise needed increases when faced with entire neighborhood rezonings, as we have seen in East Harlem and Inwood and my borough and many others. In short, it is more than just institutional memory that we need on community boards. Let me be clear. We need people who have developed expertise in land use matters, expertise that takes years to learn. Without this, I guarantee you, community boards will remain at a severe disadvantage when considering land use applications, negotiating to make projects better for the neighborhood, and crafting resolutions. Now, I know, and I believe strongly, not everyone should be on boards forever. I am proud that during the 5 years I've been borough president, we have had a 60% turnover in board members. I don't know if that's true in all the boroughs, but that is true in Manhattan. This is due to natural turnover, obviously, among members, but sometimes because we scrutinize attendance records, we observe members, and we are in constant touch with the board. This has led us to decline to reappoint board members with bad attendance. I called them and told them. I called those who are unable to fulfill their responsibilities, and I called those who have displayed poor judgment regarding conflict of interest, and I took them off. It's important to note that we have been able to make changes because of an extensive outreach and recruitment process that gives us a big and better pool of applicants to choose from. Elements of our outreach and recruitment could be codified, since community boards cannot truly represent communities if people do not know they exist. So we have online applications, we've done social media, we've distributed flyers all across the districts. And as a result, we have community and civic and labor and all these different organizations having their own sessions and then getting their people to apply. These steps have enabled us to increase applications for membership from 500 in 2017 to 1,047 in 2017. So we replaced board members who were not adequately doing their job with those who better represent their communities. It's a lot of work. And in this way, we have made Manhattan boards younger, diverse, and reflective of their community. At the same time, we reappointed those who have long-term expertise in land use and zoning, some of whom took the laboring oar of the large community rezonings to heart. I do endorse a uniform application and some basic procedural standards. For example, each borough president's office should have in-person contact with applicants. But I would caution against taking too much flexibility away from the borough presidents. I have heard that in certain years, some borough presidents have had trouble finding sufficient applicants. In Manhattan, we are inundated with applications and have combined the approaches of group and individual interviews for applicants. In addition, to ensure that borough presidents are always striving to increase the diversity and representation of their boards, I would require that 1, the applications give applicants the options of disclosing demographic information, and 2, that borough presidents be required on an annual basis to publish the demographic makeup of each board alongside the demographics of each district. We do that already. Finally, a few quick notes on training. They are vital. Trainings are vital in order for the community boards to be effective. My office provides technical assistance to boards on land use issues, on parliamentary procedure, on all the issues regarding budgeting and resolution writing and conflict of interest and using data in planning. We constantly add new workshops as needs arise. I must also commend and recommend expansion of 2 successful technical assistance programs. The Fund for the City of New York has years run an urban planning fellows program in which recent planning graduates are trained in place in community board offices for a year. They are invaluable resources for boards, bringing a level of expertise that is not always readily available. And whether through this or other means, boards should be supported in bringing an urban planner to assist with their land use work. And the challenge, of course, is that these graduate students leave after a year. And in fact, the boards need a more full-time land use planner. My office, working with Beta NYC, has also developed a Tech Fellows program in conjunction with CUNY's Public Service Court program and also the Fund for the City of New York and other funders. We train students in the use of open data, the bill that I passed in the City Council, to help communities and work closely with community boards to analyze issues, produce maps, and develop applications that enable boards to function more effectively. Resources to help boards in obtaining and working with the data they need are critical. I think it's important to work with the boards in responding to those data needs which the boards believe are necessary to properly fulfilling their responsibilities. As Beta NYC recommends, and their great staff, this could be aided by requiring DOIT to respond to the board's district needs statements insofar as they relate to technology and data. In conclusion, I'm summing up.
Yes.
The additional funding boards received this year is a start. They're expected to do a lot with a little, and they do provide constituent services, and we all know they need additional staff. But my message is very clearly that in order to be in response effectively with the land use and zoning community, they must be full-time in terms of the staff, and they must have the kind of long-term expertise that I described earlier. We cannot have term limits for community boards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me say that I'm so glad that you're here because when we have heard from so many people about community boards, the model they often give is Manhattan.
Thank you.
And what happens in your county. And so I'm very pleased. I'm also impressed by the amount of turnover. 60% is a significant number. But the truth is we're trying to figure out what to put in the charter that will make all of the borough presidents manage their community boards a little bit more like Manhattan does. Rather than just compliment you, I've got a question. This issue of online applications and requirements for applicants to be interviewed, no matter who. Do you think your fellow borough presidents would find that an infringement on their authority?
I don't think so. I mean, the issue is it is time consuming. We started out with one process. Everything is online. I believe that the other borough presidents are doing the online application. The work is interviewing 1,047 people. And the way we did it is we did it in groups, so it's not an individual 1,047. First we did it with a topic, and then we did it by the community board. You could figure that out, what makes sense for your borough. But you do need to interview those who apply. I think people who apply, they fill out a very lengthy application in the borough of Manhattan. So it takes time, but it's not rocket science, and I think it gives a more diverse opportunity for the community to feel that they're included. What could be of assistance from the administration or others is doing the demographics. That takes time. All of this data, to gather it, takes time. So that would be something that perhaps some help would be needed. And there may be ways, participatory budgeting now, there's a lot of outreach done. There could be some piggybacking on other kinds of outreach efforts. But I do think you end up with a better community representation.
Marcos?
Thank you, Borough President, for your testimony. So what struck me is something you said, which I've thought about in relation to term limits, is that you've heard that in some boroughs, unlike in Manhattan, there's not enough applicants to be on community boards. So what do you think could be done to encourage communities to, or members of communities to apply to be on community boards?
Well, obviously, we've had some success, for instance, the unions and the storekeepers represented by Hospitality Alliance and other organizations have done their own trainings. So then those folks apply. We obviously do all of the flyers and the social media. I do think you have to feel like I have a chance. So that has to be part of the buzz. In other words, if I do all this application and this outreach, then I have a chance of, getting on the community board. So it has to be a little bit of that kind of hope. And then I think also what we do with those who don't get on, which I always feel terribly because there aren't that many vacancies. It's 25 each year. There's we work with the council members. We take their recommendations. But what we do then is we meet with nonprofits. We have like a meet and greet, and we have all the nonprofits in Manhattan meet with the individuals who didn't get on, and hopefully lots of nonprofits, as Sharon probably knows, need board members. And so we try to get some board members that way. You have to keep in touch with those who don't get on and maybe hope the next year they do get on. So it's a lot of work, but I do think when you do that kind of outreach, then people are more engaged. Maybe they'll show up for the board, they'll get their friends to show up, their community organizations to show up. It's a process, and obviously you have to have a long-term commitment to that process. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's work, and I think we have done, it's not easy sometimes because you have members who've been on for a long time and the neighborhood has changed. That's the complaint I get from other boroughs. I teach at Hunter. I send my students to the community boards. That's how I really find out what's going on. and sometimes they'll say I was the youngest one by 40 years, or sometimes they say they welcome me with open arms. So the other thing is the community boards have to be friendly. They have to be, they have to make sure the community's welcome, and the community has to, that's also part of it. But my students tell me a lot.
So thank you so much for all your contributions on this subject, and obviously it's one about which you're quite expert. One of the questions that the staff suggested we seek input was with respect to the kind of technical support that would best provide the community boards with the technical expertise they require for the land use issues that you described, but also how do we craft that in a charter proposal that doesn't eliminate the discretion of borough presidents to too great a degree, but at the same time provide some uniformity across boroughs. Be very curious to hear your thoughts about that.
I'll try. So obviously I was chair of the technology committee in the city council, and I passed the open data bill. And it's my experience, particularly on the land use, because that is the real planning function of the community boards, is that you have to know what is existing in your neighborhood in order to be able to say to a developer, you know, we need senior housing, we need affordable housing for this demographic, et cetera. We need open space, we need cultural, and so on. And that comes with data. You know better than I, data-driven. So in the past, to be honest with you, the community boards had pieces of it, but nothing that they could rely on. So we're trying, I would say, to answer your question, we're doing a small bit, but helping the community boards, it takes funding to be able to know and use the open data portal, because right now it's a hit and miss. When the developer, so how you, that, in other words, it would be within the charter, I assume, to talk about the fact that this open data portal should have relevance in a real way to the community boards. And the second thing I would say is that this issue of planning, you know, maybe we don't have a planner for every single board, but they do need more staff to be able to counter this planning onslaught. In Manhattan, we've been doing it for a while. And the fact of the matter is we've had more ULURPs in Manhattan in my 5 years than all the other 5 boroughs combined. The Inwood community, which is facing a rezoning now, never had a ULURP of any magnitude in terms of rezoning. So all 5 boroughs are going to find out what it's like to deal with this zoning situation. So in terms of the way in which it fits into the charter, I don't know that I can be specific, but I can say use of data, planning experts, and finding a way that the use of figuring out how to use your planning staff in a way that focuses both on the rezonings and the aftermath of the rezonings, because you're going to have, does this work? In East Harlem, rezoning passed, and now there's a whole committee with the community board to figure out, are all the aspects of the rezoning being implemented? Rezoning doesn't end when the text amendment or the rezoning passes. It's a very long process.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Hi, John.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for coming. And you make a forceful argument about term limits, but I'm interested in your view on term limits or terms or requiring rotation of leadership positions, and particularly committee chairs on community boards. I get the expertise needs to be retained, but why do the same people need to have the committee chair on the same issue for decades?
I totally agree with you on that. In fact, in the borough of Manhattan, we have had the bylaws redone, leaving a little bit of wiggle room and diversity, but generally trying to do a boilerplate, because they had different kinds of term limits or no term limits. I'm a believer. I mean, I think it could be discussed in term limits for chairs and term limits for committees. That's a very different discussion than somebody like Ethel, who's been on for a long time on Board 7, and who can tell you what happened in 1992. Because guess what? So can the lobbyist, so can the land use, and so can the developer. And so if that expertise is not there, then that developer is going to be able to do a lot more damage to the community. I just learned that, you know, there was just a meeting the other day in Harlem with many developers, no community board members, everybody talking about what's in the pipeline, and no community input, nobody from the area having any discussion. That's the kind of issue that needs to be countered, to be honest with you, in terms of the community. The community boards are now listened to, and I think much thanks to the CAU and others, much more than ever, because they are where the people come to present. And that so-called advisory opinion, particularly on land use issues, is listened to very carefully. It is talked about, discussed, and evaluated all through the process. So that is an important advisory opinion.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming all the way from Manhattan.
It's so far. Oh my goodness. Thank you.
We'll now have our actual first panel. Nuncio Del Greco and Mark, I'm not sure I can pronounce the last name.
Shona.
Oh. I'd like to do the councilman first, if that's possible.
Good evening. Is that okay?
Yes.
Good evening. I want to thank all of my fellow Bronxites who came out tonight to personally get involved in this critical issues that will change and shape our city. You've done your borough proud. And to the borough president of Manhattan, I thank her for visiting this great borough, but remind her that I visit her borough almost daily. I also want to thank all of the commissioner members, especially the chair, Mr. Perales, who, for his generosity and giving time and his expertise to serve for this great city. The issues that this commission will consider and weigh on will determine the future of how more than 8.5 million people live and interact with the government. So thank you again for agreeing to take the time away from your work, community, and family and friends to make sure that we give New Yorkers a voice in helping determine the city's future. My first point is to question the charter revision itself, which is circumventing the council's authority, where the referendums should be on issues that can be legislated, shouldn't be on issues that can be legislated. And the issues that you had brought up earlier can all be legislated in the city of New York. Secondly, I take the position of opposing of any term limits when it comes to community boards. I thank the generosity of those men and women who truly understand the needs of their community and seek to empower them in the roles that they currently have. I do, however, support term limits on any mayoral chair or commissioners or that are appointed by the mayor to 2-year terms and must be approved by the city council. Commissioners and chairs can be reappointed to a second 2-year term by the mayor, but they must go through the council hearing process again to reassess their tenure and agency objectives for the future. Secondly, I would like to propose a small business commission to oversee the current laws and policies that govern small businesses in New York City, as well as future proposed laws and policies. This commission would be independent and oversee the work of the SBS. Thirdly, I would like to see this commission consider a 2% annual tax increase cap on real estate taxes. Cap the real estate tax levy. And we know that the tax rate is approved by Albany, but we certainly have the ability to cap the levy. This year, in this budget that was recently approved, we saw a $1.5 billion increase in real estate taxes. Year over year, for the next 4 years, we have projections of $1 billion increases in real estate taxes for all New Yorkers. We have the ability to cap the increases. And lastly, but not least, I'd like to see the budget process for New York City be less dense and give more authority to the city council and a greater role in setting and determining the agency's spending limits. And with that, I'm open to any questions.
Yeah, if you'll allow me, since we extend the courtesy to elected officials, so that I'm going to have the commission ask him questions in case he's got to leave, with your permission. I just want to comment. I don't have a question, but the reason the Charter Revision Commissions generally look at issues that could be legislated is because they're often not legislated by the City Council. In other words, while you may be within your authority, you may not be able to put the votes together, get something passed. So that's it. For years, mayors have appointed the charter commissions who have passed legislation of that kind. But something else that I think is important for you to understand, we don't pass anything. We put it before the voters, so that it really is, I think, a very democratic process. It may be difficult for members of the council to pass a piece of legislation, but by referendum, we can put it before the voters. And I think you'll agree, democracy often works well when you've got a question directly to the voters. Well, I could go on, but let me turn it over to the other members of the commission.
Chair, if I may, and I completely agree with you, except that in this particular borough, which is about 1.4 million people, if you look at the attendance of tonight, it is anything but transparent where we have involvement with lack of sufficient notice. And you brought up another interesting point, that mayors have had charters throughout the years to address issues that may not come up in the form of legislation in the city council. I can assure you that this city council is a very aggressive and eager council, willing to take on the challenges. But when the mayor appoints the entire commission and it only looks at predetermined set of issues, that is not democracy. The issues that were mentioned, from term limits to community boards to redistricting, campaign finance rules, and so on and so forth, is just a small set of issues that truly impact New Yorkers day in and day out. And this looks more like an individual assessment of the needs of New York, and not on behalf of 8.5 million residents.
I think it would be inappropriate for me to engage you in a disagreement, but let me just say that the mayor did not ask us to look at redistricting, nor did he ask us to look at community boards. These are things that have come up because of people who come and testify or send us comments. I can assure you that I don't believe he contemplated all of these issues that have come up. But
thank you, Chair.
I'd like to turn it over to other members of the commission. Annette?
I have a question. Thank you, Council Member, for your testimony. I wanted to ask you regarding your recommendation to not put forth limits on community boards, and it is an issue that the borough president talked about extensively in the last testimony, and we've heard throughout the various hearings, and it's become, as you know, it's become sort of a leading issue. I'm really curious because we've heard so many compelling arguments for term limits, but I'd like for you to elaborate a little bit more about what you see or recommendations that you have that would ensure diversity of community boards in the Bronx.
Well, certainly I think we all understand the importance of community boards and their generosity of time as volunteers. The expertise that's needed to properly accept the responsibility of determining what's in the best interest of the community, from zoning issues and other needs of a community, take time. And when you establish yourself as an expert in the many needs or the areas that community boards interact with, we have a shift as those members become chairs of their committees and so on and so forth. That expertise takes quite an amount of time for an individual to learn and get to be able to appreciate the impacts that they may have on their community. So the term limit concerns are not such an issue for me when it's the expertise that is needed. I look to empower community board members and give them more authority on what's in the best interest of the community that they represent. They are the stakeholders. They live there, work there, raise families there. It shouldn't be predetermined by an elected official what's in their best interest or any agency or department. They are on the ground. They know what's best for that community, and they do it as volunteers.
Anyone else with questions? Hearing none, I want to thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Del Greco, you've got the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Charter Revision Commissioner, Chairman Cesar Perales, and Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Nunzio Del Greco. I am President and Chief Executive Officer of the Bronx Chamber of Commerce. For nearly 35 years, I have been a public servant, helping small businesses and professionals to be more successful. Founded in 1894, the Bronx Chamber of Commerce is the voice for businesses in Bronx County, and I believe we're the oldest chamber in the city of New York. Membership in the Bronx Chamber of Commerce includes businesses ranging from large corporations, cultural institutions, universities and colleges, hospitals and medical centers, nonprofits, and mid-sized to small companies. As the concept of community boards was introduced more than 50 years ago, added to the city charter in 1963, and proven to be an important vehicle for civic engagement in the city of New York, a small business commission would provide a vital voice for the business community. As the organization representing small businesses in the Bronx, I strongly believe that a small business commission should be established with the revision of the New York City Charter. Legislation is often introduced and city and agency decisions made that have highly damaging and controversial effects on businesses. These events usually happen with little to no consultation from the business community. With more than 6,000 laws on the books that regulate the functioning, permitting, taxing, certification, licensing, fining, contracting, etc. of small businesses, more needs to be done to give this important economic engine a voice. A small business commission made up of actual small business people is the only way to bring level of understanding and clarity to the effect of laws on small businesses. Similar to the concept of a community board, a small business commission made up of businessmen and women appointed by each council member, the mayor, the controller, and the public advocate would give business a voice and assure that the consistency of businesses are finally represented. Amazing accomplishments can be achieved working in partnership with elected officials, city agencies, and the Bronx Chamber of Commerce. That concludes.
Thank you very much. Do I see a hand down there? No?
That's okay. So I'm just curious if you could expound a little bit on what the scope of that commission would be, right? What would the authorities be? What would you see as its primary functions?
Yeah, I think the commission should be consulted prior to imposing any legislation. They should be in the loop and consulted.
So it's an advisory
Yes.
commission. Okay.
Have you submitted written testimony?
Yes.
Thank you, because it's an interesting idea and something I think we have to consider. Well, let me thank both of you for coming. I really do appreciate it, taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Bonizio and Ken Miles.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is John Benizio. I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the chairman of the Business Development Committee of the Bronx Chamber of Commerce, and also as the founder and chairman of the Westchester Square Business Improvement District up here in the Bronx. I had submitted to speak on two issues, but because our president, Mr. Del Greco, did such a great job bringing forth the Business Commission, I'm going to skip over that and run to number two. This issue is the coordination of business improvement districts and the mobile vending industry, and particularly as that applies to the user rights that are granted to bids by local law and by city contract. The mobile vending industry, which has recently received a great deal of press and support from select members of the New York City Council, represents a unique set of circumstances requiring attention from a significant cross-section of agencies throughout the city. DCA, DOH, DOT, and the NYPD all have somewhat of a say in the rules and regulations that govern mobile vending in the city. Unfortunately, what appears to be over-regulation actually results in a lack of understanding between agencies and results in little to no actual oversight. Exacerbating the problem is the illegal transferring of city-issued permits, which has resulted in a usurious gray market that preys upon immigrant vendors. In areas supported by the city's 75 business improvement districts, this failure to regulate is especially egregious. More than 93,000 businesses in bid districts pay hefty assessment fees of more than $150 million per year to enhance city services and support the image and cleanliness of their districts. Mobile vendors make no such investment and often commit flagrant violations of the laws and rules of oversight agencies. Often they monopolize parking spaces beyond allowable limits, store perishable items in non-compliant containers, operate with fraudulent licensing, block sidewalks and walkways, fail to meet sanitary codes, promote litter, and plant themselves for days at a time without moving their units for nightly cleaning as is required by law. This problem is about to become worse, as legislation introduced in the council to combat the gray market seeks to increase city-issued permits by thousands of more units. Legislation is needed to allow bid organizations to have a say in the type and number of mobile vendors who set up shops on the streets in bid districts. As legal entities legislated by local law, bids are under contract with the city and actually have user rights granted by the city, quote, to undertake or permit commercial activities or other private uses of the streets or other parts of the district in which the city has any real property interest. That's from Article 2 of the City Council's contracts with the bids. Having already been granted these rights, laws should be enacted that actually protect the city from breaching its contracts with the 75 bids. Charter revisions that would grant such powers to the quasi-agency bids would protect the city's interests and enable an organized coordination of vendor usage in a large portion of the city's commercial space. Thank you.
Mr. Miles, we'll turn to you, and then we'll come back to questions.
Thank you to the members of the commission. My name is Ken Miles, and I'm a member of Community Board 9 in Manhattan, West Harlem. Today, I want to focus on two areas: civic engagement and community boards. Civic engagement. Is civic engagement an infrastructure need for the city of New York? I would argue it is. Since we were in BX, the birthplace of hip-hop, it felt right to quote the rapper and actor Will Smith, who said recently, "At this point, I think what makes a great MC is the same thing that makes a great father, makes a great husband, makes a great politician, makes a great human being, and it is your commitment to your evolution, your personal growth, for the purpose of assisting others." The commission was encouraged to understand civic engagement beyond the ballot box through examples that include voting, running for office, activism, volunteerism, advocacy, community meeting attendance, membership on community boards and other civic organizations, etc. By the committee's own admission, there is no comprehensive framework for coordinating the city's efforts on civic engagement. How do we design one? How might we look at spaces like the Center for Educational Equity at Columbia University, who just had a reinvigorating civic education conference a few months ago, as models? Community board. Our neighborhoods are changing. As a millennial serving on the community board, few people seem equipped to address how the definition of community changes as affordability becomes the key marker for where people live. How will the need for community boards shift? I don't know the answer, but reducing information asymmetry, empowering community voices, and leveling the playing field should all be strategic priorities. Having just started my second term, I believe transparency in the onboarding process would also be helpful. As someone who has hosted events to introduce younger community members to what the board does, I can say consistent application deadlines across boroughs would be helpful. Younger members are important, as is ensuring NYCHA residents have a seat at the table. I'm not in favor of the term limit conversation. I do believe a bigger conversation is preserving institutional memory. Technology can help shift that burden. Thanks to Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, and Beta NYC already has tools to track board attendance, improve accountability to governance, also monitor 311 data, but there's more to be done in that area. The charter provision mandating the recording and live streaming of meetings specifically excludes community boards from its scope. Why? If live streaming is cost prohibitive, how about logging audio recordings from meetings on a uniform website that's searchable across community boards? Another challenge expressed by my community board colleague Walter South was developers coming in burdening neighborhood infrastructure and not making contributions back to the community. I too support getting rid of as-of-right development. Looking at other city models who have followed similar paths could help. Last week, 24 hours before it started, I learned of a conference on Harlem's investment and development boom. It was what Manhattan Borough President...
You can finish up.
Last week, 24 hours before it started, I learned of a conference on Harlem's investment and development boom. I learned it was happening on a Thursday morning, had a price tag of $99 just to walk through the door. Certainly not the most accessible meeting for community members to attend. I would argue that's by design. I was greeted by a room of 200 people, of whom I counted roughly 30 black and brown faces, and of those, 10 were food service staff. During the conference, which opened with an all-white panel that included a guy from $1 Million Listing, it became abundantly clear that these developers talked about Harlem as though nobody had lived there since the 19th century. It was a modern-day Columbusing where the actual history and context was stripped from the conversation. The more glaring reality, and I'll just finish this point, was that each of these development projects were happening in silos. I asked, who helped set the master vision for what Harlem is going to become? Who has a master vision for Harlem? An honest answer from the bid representative was there was no unified voice bringing Harlem and those interests together. The city lacks cohesive long-term planning, something indicated by the lack of transparency around ULURP process and how it plays out across community boards. And I'll end on this note. What might land use, infrastructure development, and environmental quality conversations look like under the umbrella of a long-term sustainability and equity?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've had a couple of commission members arrive late after we had made our introductions. Can I ask them to introduce themselves? I've got two on my left.
Good evening. I'm Kyle Bragg. I'm Secretary Treasurer of the 160,000 member Service Employees Union 32BJ. Good evening. My name is Mendy Marachnik. I am the President of COJO of Staten Island.
Hi, I'm Wendy Weiser. I direct the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice and NYU School of Law.
With that, which of my commission members has a question? Well, I have a comment while somebody's figuring out whether they have a question. I'm glad the councilman is still here. You've indicated that you'd like legislation passed. My instinct, frankly, is that what you're looking for is something that ought to be before the city council and not necessarily embedded in the city's constitution, in the city charter. So that I don't know how else to comment, except that you've made a very persuasive argument. I think there may be a need for legislation in this area. I'm certainly an expert, but certainly I'm glad the councilman is here.
May I comment?
Yes.
Thank you. As you brought up before, okay, part of the reason why the commission exists is because there are often issues that are not legislated, okay? And, you know, New York, the fabric and strength of New York City has been its immigrant business owners for over a century, more than that. Okay, so it's not something where businesses are actually being given a voice by legislation, in large part because businesses don't vote, people vote. Okay, so there's nearly no interest in that. But giving a voice to businesses, similar to the Business Commission that Mr. Del Greco brought up, is something that can be put into a charter revision. And businesses and the important businesses of New York City and its commercial engine should be recognized in the city charter.
Point well made.
I have a question for Mr. Miles. We've heard a lot about the need to ensure the community board members have the tools at their ready to make informed decisions. You're a new-ish community board member. If you could tell us very briefly, what are the 2 or 3 things that would have helped you be a more effective board member? What kinds of either areas would you have wanted to receive technical assistance or education on, or ongoing support for? Very broadly, just the categories.
Yeah, I definitely think land use is key. I also think that, you know, I think if there's a way to kind of capture the knowledge in terms of across areas, just like a sample packet that each community board can kind of onboard, I think that would just be useful to get some historical context on decision making and how it's been done. I know some of the challenges are that, you know, board notes can be missing, or just you've got a lot of history. A lot of the websites are currently not up to par, so it's like good luck finding whatever you need to find, but curating kind of information so that newer members can get a sense across all areas, what some major milestones have been across different committees. That way you can kind of inform going forward where major priorities for some of the longest serving, or, you know, some of the longest impacted community members may be.
That's great. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Anyone else? Hearing none, let me thank both of you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Yvonne O'Neill and Dr. James Fairbanks. O'Neill.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I wish to thank my borough president, Mr. Ruben Diaz Jr., and the commissioners of the Charter Revision Commission for soliciting the input of the citizens of New York City in this process. This is what democracy looks like. My name is Yvonne O'Neill. I am on the executive committee of the United Nations NGO Commission on the Status of Women, and an elected member of the Diocesan Council of the Episcopal Diocese of New York. But this evening, I am here as secretary on the steering committee of New York City for CEDAW. New York City for CEDAW is a diverse coalition of over 200 organizations whose mandate is to ensure that a women's Bill of Rights is explicitly included in the New York City Charter revision. We are appreciative of all that New York City has done to enshrine the principles of non-discrimination in its laws. CEDAW provides a framework to define gender discrimination and to highlight the city's lead in recognizing and protecting human rights. Therefore, a CEDAW framework should be integrated into the New York City Charter to cement New York City's commitment to gender non-discrimination. CEDAW, or the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, is an international human rights treaty that defines gender discrimination by international consensus. While CEDAW is a 1970s document that only recognized gender as a binary of women and men, It has been amended through general recommendations to further include gender nonconforming people and should be understood in the same way that New York City law recognizes the diversity of gender. We also want to recognize intersectionality, that other forms of discrimination also impact upon gender discrimination. While women comprise the greater half of the New York City population, biases either assume we know women or even make women invisible. Women's issues are separated from general issues and are relegated to the fringes of discussion. Women are then overlooked or merely given a cursory examination in how issues of general import affect them. For women to fully and equally participate in society, we must be seen and be heard. All issues are women's issues, just as all issues are men's issues. However, we're not used to seeing women's involvement in all issues. We'd like the New York City Charter to mandate that all city programs, all city funding, and all city employment continuously perform an assessment of impact on women and gender. Because we're not used to asking the questions of how women are affected, we offer a framework or a list of questions that we would like the Commission to consider for the Charter revision to frame the assessment. This is where an effective rights-based methodology comes into our recommendations. CDAR provides the tools to guide us through an analysis of how city proposals, funding, and employment practices may inadvertently discriminate by gender. We wish to maintain New York City's leadership as a premier city in the United States, as an international city, and as the home of the United Nations, and to highlight further the importance of embedding human rights into our most basic law, the New York City Charter.
Thank you.
The New York City...
Your time's up. Are you summing up?
I just have one other sentence. Thank you.
Proceed.
The New York City for CEDAR Coalition advocates that gender discrimination holds no place in New York City, and the New York City Charter should mandate using assessments based upon CEDAR to ensure that gender discrimination, intentionally or unintentionally, does not occur in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Fairbanks?
Good evening, Jim Fairbanks. I must thank the hardworking staff that you have, because I was just walking up the street in my summer attire and they charmed me, so here I am to testify. I hope to read your report later and perhaps submit written comments. First, civic engagement. I believe that all city-funded programs ought to have an advisory board. Schools, we have parent associations, but if you have a funded youth center, an ACS center, a welfare center, or a college that receives city-funded, you must have mandated a community advisory council. This is foundational. You can just begin to imagine the hundreds of new community engagement through these advisory councils. One example, shelters. I've belonged to, when I worked for an elected official, she demanded that every new shelter have a community advisory board. So I joined 7 of them. And I used to go reach out for people who really oppose this homeless shelter in their community to try to get them involved. If they got involved, they would know that shelters need help, and they need support of the community, and they need all kinds of services. And I can think of a couple people who just changed their attitude because they monthly went into the shelter and saw what was needed, and they cared. The other thing is that I believe that Charter Revision Commission proposals should be based on widespread movements. Widespread movements. I have good ideas, you have good ideas, but when we put things on the charter, we better make sure that they're broad-based amongst the residents of the city of New York. One example, if the 15 low-income neighborhoods that the city is now rezoning listen to the community, then you would put on the Charter Revision Commission, however unrealistic it may seem to some, that permanent affordable housing must be based on the area median income of that neighborhood. There has never been such organizing in the city of New York in decades around those 15 neighborhoods that are being rezoned that turn into gentrification. So we must have proposals based on mass movements that the residents care about, and not just on the good ideas that I might have as an individual. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Right.
Let me just again make a comment and something I said earlier. Our function as a commission is to try to identify a handful of ideas and issues that we will put before the voters in November, so that I would hope that as a result of our work, as a result of hearing to folks like yourselves, we come up with some good issues to put in the city charter, and hopefully the people of the city of New York will adopt them. But it's up to the voters. Ultimately, it's not up to us. Are there questions by any members of our commission? Let me just say something else. See, the chair has the hold of the microphone, and I get to do a lot of talking. These are very good ideas that you both have proposed. I can only say that we did not hear them early in our proceedings, but we will try to see if we can still engage and discuss those ideas, even though we've already identified 5 issues that we're focusing on. These are 2 very, very good ideas. Thank you both very, very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
There is a question?
I did have one question, if that's okay, for Ms. O'Neill. Are there examples of any other municipalities or local jurisdictions that have adopted this gender assessment tool that you're recommending that we could look at?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there is a movement throughout the United States for the cities for CEDAR, but the first city to implement it was San Francisco. And I think Ms. Gotzel might actually know Prashanti Damaraj, who's at Rutgers, and she was the person who actually worked very hard on that issue in San Francisco, and she's an advisor to us here in New York. Berkeley, California has adopted it, San Jose, California, Pittsburgh, actually Miami-Dade County has adopted these principles of CEDAR. So there are a number of other cities that are actually looking at this issue right now.
And they're conducting the assessments as well within their agencies?
Yes, they are conducting assessments. And we have been at this for over 3 years here in New York City, and we've actually met with Julissa Ferraris, when I don't know what she's doing now, but she was in charge of the budget for the city, and we've met with her and we've discussed what the costing will be, because in order to do this, it takes you have to include in the budget about 10 to 25 cents for each woman in the community. So there is a cost.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. We've got 2 Michaels for the next panel, Michael Brady and Michael Belzer.
I think I can. Nobody's using.
Good evening. My name is Michael Belzer, and I'm a former city council candidate, a community board member who served as the co-chair of the 197A subcommittee on Community Board 9 here in the Bronx. And I don't know if it counts, but I got an A in my politics and government in New York City class at CUNY Baruch, so I think that might make me an expert. I don't know. So I'd like to start by thanking the commission for all your work in putting together this preliminary report. And as I do with most public hearings, I also like to thank the city charter for allowing the people to have input here today. I really appreciate the focus that you all have put in, and I think the 5 areas are a good start for the commission to tackle. In terms of campaign finance, I'm fully in support of lifting the cap matching funds to allow 100% of the spending limit. I think a lot of what I'll be reiterating was in my 5:30 testimony to this commission. In terms of municipal elections, I believe that we can go further in opening municipal elections to permanent residents. You know, these people, they come here, they're on their way to citizenship, they pay taxes, they deserve, at least at the municipal level, to get to vote for their representation. No taxation without representation. For civic engagement, definitely agree that you all should be looking to see how we can make participatory budgeting across the board. I think it should be mandatory in every community district. I don't know that it has to necessarily line up with the council member. I don't know what you all can look into in getting that done. And I think that could really go into, a nice meshing of community engagement and community boards. As a community board member, I realized that a lot of the engagement was very piecemeal, very dependent on who would be on the board at the moment, what the chair looked like, what kind of resources they were able to get out of their local council members, assembly members, and it didn't really seem that there was enough of a standardized way of reaching out to the community. I mean, even right now, kicking myself for not putting on my Facebook a transit alliance meeting that they're having, a Riders Alliance meeting about buses. But in terms of community boards, I'm in full support of term limits. We had a borough president and a council member come up here and say, hey, well, we need to keep no term limits because we need to keep this institutional knowledge going, or people aren't prepared. They have to get up to speed. But those are the two bodies and people who are putting the members onto these boards, so they should be doing everything that they can, and I think Manhattan Borough President has done a great job of bringing more resources into getting the trainings. But there's 50 slots in most of the in all the community boards. They're not all full. So if these people are here and they're not up to speed and they've been there, term limits isn't going to do anything to stop or change that. We need more resources, and I think this commission looking at how we can do civic engagement and getting more resources for the community board is the way. And I just want to reiterate, I am for term limits for community boards.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you to the Commission for hosting this amazing event. Thank you to Hostos Community College for also being a gracious host. My name is Michael Brady. I'm the Executive Director of the 3rd Avenue Business Improvement District, which oversees the area just to our east. It's the Bronx's oldest business improvement district, seeing about 200,000 pedestrians daily. New York City's second most busiest intersection, second to Times Square. Additionally, we oversee the Southern Boulevard Business Improvement District and the Port Morris Mott Haven Merchants Association. In full disclosure, I was also the master planner under the New York State Department of State Brownfield Opportunity Area Program for the South Bronx waterfront under the current chair's leadership, so thank you for that opportunity. It really got me to cut my teeth in land use. Additionally, I serve as the co-chair of the New York City Industrial Development Council. While the focus of my comments tonight are on small business, I would be remiss if I didn't comment on community boards and their lasting impact on our city. I'm sure my written remarks are more articulate than my notes, so please bear with me. In terms of community boards and what needs to happen, I think we need to mandate robust training programs. We also need to give community boards the tools, the funding, and the staff to ensure that land use decisions, parliamentary procedure, liquor authority rulings, and overall New York City cultural competency trainings are introduced. To this end, I would recommend, as has been often the case in charter commissions, a fully funded and mandatory urban planner paid for by the city in every community board in the city of New York. Additionally, on term limits, it's my belief that community board committee chairs and general leadership positions should be on term limits for consecutive service. Lastly, the boards should reflect the communities that they serve, and that information should be public and open on their websites. And since we're on the conversation of websites and technology, it should be consistent and equally and equitably applied to all community boards throughout the city of New York. The Third Avenue Business Improvement District is the only one of the 75 business improvement districts in the city of New York to have equity in our mission statement. It's something very near and dear to our heart, and something that I'm sure all the commissioners here are very attuned to. On to small business. I, like many of my peers here today, believe that there should be a small business commission established in the city of New York, akin to those in San Francisco if you're looking for best practices, Ms. Weiser. Very good thing. Additionally, I think that we should be applying the equity lens not just to small business, but to general city practices. Several municipalities, such as Dallas and Santa Fe, have applied to such a lens to agencies like the EDC, SBS, DOT, and several others. The Small Business Commission would provide oversight to city legislation, regulations, and agencies in New York City, most notably the city's Agency on Small Business Services. I think that this commission should, got 2 more points, I promise, should investigate land use regulations that are suggested in the New York City Council Retail Diversity Report, as those would have a long-term impact and something that should be adopted by this commission into the charter. And then lastly, just on the note of from Mr. Benizio in terms of mobile vending and its precedent in terms of a charter suggestion. Mobile vending is at the very heart of land use issue. So just as we address ULURP, just as we address public space in our charter revisions, we so too should address the use of sidewalks and who has jurisdiction and who has enforcement power over that. That is beyond the scope of the existing council and any council before it, and really should be addressed in the city commission because it involves city-owned property. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. As usual, I'll have the first question. This idea of citywide, what I would call community participation in budgeting, you suggest that it would fit in comfortably with community boards. Do you have a sense as to whether or not the community board you serve on would enthusiastically play a role in managing that process?
I know from my time on the community board, there was a lot of interest in participatory budgeting. We had one council member who had signed on, member Salamanca, and we definitely did see a bunch of community board 9 members and public and people who come to the meetings attend. Why I feel like it would be a nice mesh is, the community boards already put forward a district needs statement and other priorities that they want this funding to eventually go to. So why not already have that conversation inside that same district where you already have theoretically 50 people that are from all parts of the district, represents all different walks of lives, age diversity, all of that already should be represented in the community board. So if this commission is able to make the revisions to the charter that I think you want to make, it would have a great overlap.
And do you think that the community board would effectively engage the rest of the community on these discussions?
Right now, the process to get on the community board is fraught with a lot of different things, such as political influence and who knows who. But I think if we make some best practices and standardize the procedure across the city on how you get onto the community board and minimum level of qualifications, if we're having borough presidents and council members complain or bring up that people aren't as well versed in issues as they should be, then why are these people still being put on community boards? I think that's what we should stop and take a recess on.
Great.
So I'm curious about there are differing suggestions with respect to whether or not there should be a mandatory requirement of an urban planner for every single community board, or should there be a pool of urban planners available to community boards as needed. So I'd be curious to hear from either of you what your perspective is on why one would be preferable to the other, given the suggestion that community boards may differ in their need and whether or not there should be a resource allocation available to community boards that would be uniform, but how the community board spends that could differ depending upon their needs.
Just from my previous experience, I had the privilege of serving on Community Board 1 here in the Bronx. And not every community board deals with the ULURP process. Not every community board deals with a multi-million-dollar development being built in their neighborhood. But every community board can benefit from a community urban planner. People need parks, people need roadways, people need to understand traffic patterns. And I think that giving the opt-out to apply those resources elsewhere would be an egregious mistake. I think giving opportunities to divert funding to other resources would not be wise. No one needs a bigger office. No one needs a more swanky place to go. People do need resources, and community boards have to be humble enough to understand where they don't have it. And just from my experience here in Community Board 1, we have a very experienced but graying community board that is very much entrenched, and they will not be amenable to a young urban planner coming in and calling the shots, so they will not hire that person. So I would think that it would have to be a mandatory, yes, you need an urban planner, here it is, but understanding that urban planning is a broad stroke, and understanding that ULURPs don't take place all over the place, but roads do. And just general planning for communities is needed. And also it really empowers, I think, the community boards to have someone on their side. During a lot of these meetings, if they're picking from a pool of planners, usually those planners are going to come from DCP, but by doing that, you don't have an unbiased planner on your side. So having an unbiased planner that actually represents the community's interest, I think, is paramount.
Yeah, and my view on whether each board needs a dedicated planner or not, I think that comes in terms of what the board is facing upcoming. If there's a lot of ULURP applications or there's a huge rezoning coming in, they should definitely have a dedicated planner. But in the remarks I gave on May 30th, I believe that each community board should be tasked in coming up with a 197A plan under Section 197A within every 10 years. So maybe this can overlap with term limits, maybe they're 10 years, that each board would have to take it up, but it would be on, you can stagger it. So maybe the urban planner, maybe you have 2 per borough, and there's 2 plans going at any time, and they're moving the plan around, the planning dates of when the plan should be finished, so that planner can stay on with the community board throughout that process and then move when you start the next process with another community board.
Yes.
Do you want to go first? Oh, first. So I did 2 questions. One is multiple people have testified in favor of a standardized process for getting on community boards, but I don't think anybody has testified as to what that process ought to look like, and so I'm wondering if you might just give some thoughts on that for both of you. And then the second question is just on the just follow-up question to you about the pooled urban planners. Is there any modification that would still mandate urban planners and provide that resource, but that would have it as a shared resource that you would find acceptable as well? So.
Second question first, is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of having pooled resources, I think that it's achievable, but I think just by virtue of community boards maintaining their independence over their decision-making process and being an advisory capacity to borough presidents and the city at large, that whatever pool that is there needs to be unbiased as such and probably rotating. We don't want, I love Carl, but we don't want a Carl to come out of the Bronx and being the grand poobah of planners. So I think that has to really be thought through in terms of taking a look at pooled assets and how to take a look at that. to the first question, in terms of a standardization, I think that should happen. But I think that the approach in which that standardization is offered to our city is something that really needs to be drilled down upon. A lot of folks in NYCHA housing don't have access to the web. So are we also going to, a la Housing Connect or HPD, mobile vehicles, do that in neighborhoods where people can then apply for their community boards in a mobile car? I think that training really has to be thought out on that before we make any sweeping decisions in terms of how we're going to make this amazing process with an online portal and everyone will have access to it, because the fact is not everyone has access to it. We're still dealing with a lot of racial and income inequity in our city.
In terms of qualifications, I think it would be different depending on, like, if you're talking about hiring of district managers. I think that's also something that definitely there should be more rigorous standards around, similar to any other city position, educational background, things like that. In terms of board members, I think it would be something that we'd have to go much more broadly on what these qualifications would look like, but I think the Manhattan Borough President has started in terms of doing the interviews in a meeting format that people can at least, there's some competencies that have to be shown in terms that you can sit through a meeting. If the meetings follow Robert Rules of Order, maybe you have to pass some kind of test to prove that you at least understand the basic tenets of Robert's Rules of Order. I know some borough presidents make you attend at least one committee meeting, one general meeting. So these kind of qualifications could be put in, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to keep a lot of people out if there's a robust avenue for people to be trained in these kind of competencies for the, like the borough president said before, follow up with people who didn't make it the first year, because I'm someone who's gone out and gotten 16 and 17-year-olds on the community board, and a lot of time it's following up, hey, this is the kind of things you should be looking to put into your application. These are the kind of things that if you're going to show up to a meeting that you should be asking about. Because my experience on the community board was a lot of people, they had this title, they came and they volunteered their time, but what were they doing in their time? A lot of the times nobody read anything before voting on it, or were not aware of which agency had to deal with that, that there was already public hearings on these issues, and it's not fully their fault. There's not a lot of resources that go into it, but I think some base level of qualifications to show that you know, you're not just giving your time, but you also have the capacity to do this position, because it is, you know, it's one of the lowest level positions in the government, but it is a position within the government, and it should be treated as such.
I think somebody else had a question.
Yep, I have a question. Yep. So, Michael on the left, you made an important point early on in your testimony about municipal elections, and I wanted to probe a little bit further. So we sort of touched on it, and we focused the bulk of our discussion on community boards, and that is, of course, you know, an important issue that we're considering. We have also heard other testimonies on this issue of non-citizen voting. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more about that, and specifically if you are you recommending all residents, documented and undocumented folks, be considered as well? And anything else you want to add on the subject?
I think the standard that was set when for school boards, the similar qualifications to be able to vote. So I think that was permanent residents only were able, green card holders and above. So I feel like that would be a good start to the eligibility for school board elections as they used to be, as a start for that.
I think that Michael is 100% correct on using that as a model, and I would even go one step further on the training model in terms of competencies. I think the Charter Commission has a very real opportunity here to mandate cultural competencies in the training of not only community boards but all city agencies. As we seek to broaden our pool of voters, as we seek to broaden our community boards, I think it's very important that our community boards understand each other and the communities that they serve, and that's something that's not reflected currently in the city process.
If there are no other questions, let me thank this panel. You've been very instructive. Thank you very much. We've got one last panel. Marita Dunn. It looks like Samelis Lopez.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me? Am I loud?
Yes, no, we hear you very well.
I really hadn't planned to speak, but I guess I will. I am the former chair of Community Board 9 in Manhattan. I was appointed to the board in 1993 at a time when everyone was told community boards were little city hall, and whatever came out of the community board was absolutely important to what happened at City Hall down the line. Over the years, more and more I hear, oh, we're advisory. Well, I can advise you all I want. You don't have to listen. So, I mean, we need to kind of take another look. For me personally being there, I had the privilege of getting an extended vote of 1 year over the normal line of time so that I would be there for the final planning for the West Harlem Piers, which, as some people will know, really gorgeous now, West Harlem Piers and Park, at the foot of 125th Street and the Hudson River. I left and I became part of the people who negotiated the Columbia Benefit Agreement so that they could put the 3 new campuses that they have spread all over West Harlem at the moment. So I kind of have some idea of what is going on. I say that because I wanted to once again say how important it is to have some sort of memory on a board, people there who can know what happened before. A year and a half ago, I returned to the board, and I'm currently the chair of Economic Development and the West Harlem Piers. Just in case anybody forgot how hard it was to work with me in the past, they now know I'm back. But this is one of the reasons why I say it is very, very important to have some institutional memory if you're going to have a successful board. The other thing is, as I'm thinking, when I got on the board, previous members would adopt a brand new member. They would literally, a general board come up and say, oh, you knew, let me explain this to you, let me tell you this, so that you didn't have to come in there absolutely not understanding what was happening. And that's all I wanted to say, and thank you for the time.
Well, thank you very, very much.
I have a statement that I prepared. Hello, my name is Samelis Lopez. Thank you so much for making this opportunity for the community to comment on community board reform. As a former member of Bronx Community Board 7, I'm advocating in full support of not only term limits, but professionalizing the community board member appointment process to remove politics out of the equation. Empower community boards with on-site urban planning expertise so that they can take proactive ownership of their community's long-term planning goals and other measures to ensure community boards are truly representative of the people's will. Community boards need to be elevated to policy-making bodies whose proposals are backed by legislation so that their planning efforts are given real teeth. Community boards need to be independent bodies that can offer a system of real checks and balances, especially in light of the controversial developments and rezonings proposed as of late that were at odds with the will of the community. Right now, elected officials wield too much power over community board members to such an extent that many members often vote against their conscience as to what's best for their communities because they fear the threat of political retaliation that may lead to their removal as board members. And that's something that's very real. It's very often the case that serious and dedicated community board members cannot take certain political stances or support candidates for office that they believe in when the views of those candidates are at odds with the political elite. This is not right, and I'm here to denounce this undue, undemocratic, and oppressive influence in our community boards. What we need to do is have prospective community board members organize in their local communities and make the case directly to the neighborhoods as to why they should be selected to serve. To keep the process equitable and transparent, we need to move away from having people with close ties to partisan political parties to take over these boards. We don't need yes people that serve the political class. We need activists on these boards that have demonstrated an unwavering commitment to advance the needs of our communities first.
Thank you very much. I'm looking around to see if...
I just wanted to say one other thing. I really learned so much between the meeting I went to yesterday and coming here today and even listening to you, because the community boards that I have been affiliated with in West Harlem and I think it's the board below, I can't think of it at the moment, leaves me. They don't seem to have this particular problem, so I'm very glad to know, I'm very happy to be aware that this problem exists. Fortunately, I don't quite have that problem. Yes, because if I didn't know it existed, I wouldn't have, yes, I'm happy to know I didn't know before, so now I know to pay more attention to what is happening in other boards that isn't happening in mine. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you both for your testimony. Ms. Lopez, is it? I wonder if you have a specific recommendation for how folks would get on to the community board if they're not appointed.
Well, I think I said it in my statement. I think I mentioned it in my statement. Basically, maybe give community board, prospective community board members a resources that they need to make the case to the community directly. Maybe it could be, running.
But who would be the individuals that select them? Would it be in the form of an election, or
it would be the form of a nonpartisan election?
Okay.
And they would be given the resources so that they can make the case directly in the neighborhoods that are included in that community board, because very often community boards have 5 or 6 neighborhoods. Maybe it could be prospective community board member from one neighborhood saying, I'm really passionate about this area, I have expertise, I would like to make the case to the people that live in the community for me to be able to serve them in my professional capacity. And I would also argue that people who have professional planning expertise, whether you are a zoning lawyer or an urban planner, or you're in real estate, or whatever expertise you have, to select those people to serve on the community board too, because it can help demystify the zoning and the development process and empower current community board members to understand what's going on. Because in my case, I'm very active. I know a lot of people that are active on community boards. Many often community board members make decisions and vote on things that they don't fully understand. They don't fully understand the zoning process, the development process, even how city planning works. So it's really important to give incoming community board members the tools that they need to understand the city processes and the importance of public hearings and the importance of showing up. Because this room right now, it should be filled with people. And it's not. We need to re-envision our outreach efforts to make sure that rooms like these, at hearings like these, are packed with people so that we can organize and we can pack these rooms up with people from the community that are going to fight for the interests of the people. And I find that to not very often be the case, and it should be.
Is there anyone else? I find myself in this weird situation in which I want to engage, I don't want to use the word argue, but let me suggest this possibility. Let's assume I completely agree with you about the need to have the community select the people on the community board, and you seem to be suggesting that there be elections. The problem is that your concern is, to use your term, the political elites are the problem. You don't think they would control those elections as well?
Well, I'm just brainstorming, so this is a suggestion that I'm like bringing
I'm
to the
just
panel.
I'm
Maybe we can
brainstorming
work
back.
after this hearing together, and maybe we can flush that out a little bit. But I think it's important to, listen, I don't have anything against any elected official. I respect a lot of the elected officials of our city, but sometimes I have philosophical disagreements in terms of community engagement and bringing people into the conversation and empowering them with the tools so that they can understand and fight for their community and show up. And right now, I don't think that that's necessarily happening in the way that it
I
should be.
agree with you. I'm just playing the devil's advocate because we've heard
Appreciate that.
We've heard people suggest that community board members ought to be elected, and then at the same time, they're very concerned about the influence of people involved in local politics. So it seems to me that that might not be the solution, and that we ought to look. We're very concerned here, members of this commission, as to how we might figure out the best way of getting people appointed to community boards. But we too are struggling, and to use your term, brainstorming, trying to figure out if there's something we would put into the city charter that will improve the situation. Does anyone else have a comment? If not, I'm going to thank both of you for your presentations.
Thank you for having us.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn. I hear a motion on my left, a second on my right. All those in favor? The motion is passed.
Wow.
You're very good at